Hi, I'm Tim.
I'm Corinne.
And for our next assignment, we'll be providing intelligence on James Bond 007 and his first cinematic adventure, Dr. No, from 1962.
My name is Bond. James Bond. My instructions were implicit. I was to leave for Jamaica in 2 hours. License to kill.
I thought you less stupid. I could have had you killed in the swamp.
And why didn't you?
You damaged my organization. Unfortunately, I misjudged you. You are just a stupid policeman whose luck is run out.
Maybe it was my luck. Up to my neck in hot water. Or something blowing up in my face.
The explosive screen dramatization of the book that has entertained millions of readers. The exotic and tantalizing Dr. No.
After a British intelligence agent vanishes in Jamaica and several U.S. rocket launches fail due to strange malfunctions, suave British spy James Bond is sent to investigate. Dodging several attempts in his life by enemy agents, he uncovers a conspiracy operating from the nearby island of Crab Key, owned by mysterious scientist Dr. No. With the help of boatman Quarrel and the beautiful Honey Rider, Bond infiltrates the madman's stronghold to prevent the evil genius's disruption of an American space launch. As per usual, we'll be discussing Dr. No in detail, so if you haven't seen the movie and want to remain unspoiled, we recommend you watch the film before listening to the rest of the episode. Okay, so the first question is, who's your James Bond? Which actor playing James Bond is your guy?
It's a tough question because as I see more of the James Bond films, I am liking James Bond less and less. I'm going to go with Daniel Craig because he was not my first Bond, but he's the first Bond that I enjoyed watching.
And what was your first Bond movie, if you can remember?
There are a couple of different stories. The first time I knew that James Bond existed as a movie character was when I was a kid. And we'd walk, video stores, and you walk around and you look at all the titles. Fascinated with Octopussy. I knew it wasn't supposed to be something I was looking at, but I didn't know why. But it was funny. I didn't get it. And I was little, and it's kind of stuck with me. I know what the cover looks like. I remember just being really confused. But the first one that I saw was Goldfinger. Goofy, campy, didn't love it, moved on with my life, and didn't watch any more James Bond until Casino Royale.
I remember I grew up right during the Roger Moore heyday, but never really got into it. I always thought it just kind of looked silly. The first James Bond movie I actually saw as one of the least Bond-like ones is License to Kill, where they were starting to imitate other action movies from the period, and it was Bond goes after drug dealers and massacres people and stuff. But as for my Bond, I'd have to go with Craig as well, because he actually plays him as a character, not just this cipher that people can project their fantasies onto, and he does play him as this angry, tortured guy who's not supposed to be a good guy.
Yeah, James Bond is a Mary Sue for dudes.
Pretty much.
Sorry,
yeah.
guys.
And I will say, in this movie, we see little hints of the idea of, yes, he's this incredibly bad dude who just happens to be working for the good guys, but it's still a lot more idealized for guys to
I don't
be able
even
to
know
enjoy.
if necessarily he's a very bad guy. He's a scumbag, but because he does have this license to kill, it gives the character a license to do whatever he wants to do within reason. He can't take over the world, for instance. It would go against the hero image that we have, because he's a cookie cutter. He's a gingerbread man hero. I don't even know how to put it, but he can do bad things as long as those bad things in the end get him to vanquish the villain.
Still, it's a bit of a shock, especially like in this movie, there's a scene where he'll just execute a guy who's not even armed at that point, who's run out of bullets.
Who are you working for, Professor?
Well, you might as well know, as you won't live to use the information.
I'm working for Mr. Smith & Wesson. And you've had your 6.
Shoots him, has his little quip, moves on.
He didn't need to do half of the things he did in this film. It really did feel like the writers were playing out a fantasy, and they were allowing the viewers to play out that fantasy along with James Bond, if that's the fantasy they want.
Let's get into a little basic info of the movie. It was released on October 5th, 1962 in England, and May 8th, 1963 in the U.S. Filmed for a budget of $1.1 million and made $59.5 million at the box office, so this was a huge hit. And of course, based on the novel by Ian Fleming, which was published in 1958, and was actually the 6th in the series.
This is the first movie that we've reviewed or broken down. It's the first movie that we've broken down that I have outright hated. I can't even tell you how much I hate it because it would take an essay. Usually we come up against films that, and I hadn't seen this. We've tried to do this episode 4 times. We watched 20 minutes of it, and I decided I just didn't want to watch it, or I was tired. I don't remember what it was. And then we kept putting it off and putting it off. Then we watched the whole movie, and I could not record. I just couldn't. I didn't pay attention. I didn't pay enough attention to the last half of it because right around the time Ursula shows up, I checked out. And then tonight we watched the last half of it so that we could record this. So that's 4-ish times that we've attempted this, and I kept evading it. Don't make me record, Doctor No. No. So I come at this movie from a place of hate. Don't expect good things.
I will say there's things I appreciate and admire, especially in terms of the pattern it sets for some of the later Bond movies, which are better. There are definitely things in there I think are completely distasteful and just can't get around, absolutely. But it's almost one of those things where it's not quite as bad as this one, but it's like Birth of a Nation, where you look at it and go, this is disgusting, but I see some of the things in it that have value in terms of filmmaking or other things.
I have not reached the point where I can say this movie has value.
Well, there's a couple things I think I'll bring up, or maybe we can get into that in terms of the technical stuff. But so let's get down to it. Sean Connery as James Bond. What do we think?
Well, he's always been the James Bond. You know, he is Sean Connery Bond, James Bond. You know, when you think of James Bond, at least when I think of James Bond, I think of Sean Connery. But having just seen Dr. No, I feel like any action star of the time could have really played that role well. I don't think he distinguished himself in that part.
I will give him some credit in that, as opposed to how the character is usually thought of and depicted in the books, he does give it a little bit more of a rough-hewn kind of brawler quality to it that I don't think would have been there originally, where he's written to be much more this very sophisticated guy. There's some of that, but there's also the sense that this is the guy you don't want to meet in a back alley, too, which I think comes partially from Connery's background, that he was a very working-class actor going into this. He's
not a very suave man. We're supposed to believe he is. And all of the characters behave as if he is very charming and very suave, but he's just scummy. He's gross.
Well, you did invite me, remember?
Oh, of course. I just didn't expect you here so soon. Yes, come in. I'll just go and put some clothes on.
Don't go to any trouble on my account.
Please.
Well, forgive me. I thought I was invited up here to admire the view.
There are a couple stories about how Connery was cast. He was 30 at the time. Supposedly, the editor, Peter Hunt, offered to show the producer of the film, Harry Saltzman, a reel of Connery in this movie On the Fiddle that he had just worked on. But other stories say that Albert Broccoli spotted him in, of all movies, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and saw him in a fight scene in that and decided that he had this rugged grace of like this panther and that this is the guy he wanted to give a shot in the role. Connery took a meeting with the producers and presented that kind of macho, swaggering attitude they were looking for, and they gave him a shot. The director, Terrence Young, kind of took him under his wing and showed him where to buy his suits, how to order his drinks, all this kind of stuff to make him into this gentleman spy. Apparently, Ian Fleming, the original writer, didn't really like Connery in the role. Because he didn't feel like he matched up to this sophisticated image that he had in his brain for him. But after a couple of movies, I think it was after From Russia with Love, Fleming decided that he was good in the role. He even rewrote the character to actually have Scottish descent in one of the later books.
Oh.
Among those considered for the part were Richard Johnson, the scientist from The Haunting, Cary Grant, who was interested but would only do one movie, and they really wanted somebody who was going to be signed up for a whole bunch of them. Patrick McGoohan and David Niven, who would actually get his chance to play him when they did the spoof movie Casino Royale. Fleming allegedly really wanted James Mason for the part, which I don't know if I can picture James Mason pulling this off. Roger Moore supposedly considered, but was still working on the Saint television program, and he says that as far as he knew, he wasn't under consideration for it at the time. Actually, though Connery is considered the first James Bond, he really isn't. The first James Bond was Barry Nelson, who played him in this TV version of Casino Royale that was filmed back in 1954, with Peter Lorre playing the Le Chiffre part.
Wow.
That's one of the reasons why they didn't use that as the first movie in the film series, because the rights were still held by this television company. And why it took so long for them to get it into the series. It wasn't until the 2000s that they finally got the rights back and were able to do the film with Daniel Craig.
Oh, very interesting. I do like how out of order it is. Now we live in the age of films that have big backstories, and we need the origin story. And I like that we don't necessarily get the 007 origin story in our first film. It may have been a little confusing for the audience at the time coming in and, oh, I guess he's a spy and I guess he's suave, and having to learn on the go. But being spoon-fed origin stories, it detracts as well.
And there's not really a huge amount of continuity in these early Bond movies. There's a couple that follow one after another, especially once you get into Blofeld and Spectre, but for the most part, they're pretty standalone. So you can kind of jump in wherever and pretty much get the story.
Yeah.
Next in the cast, we have Ursula Andress playing Honey Ryder.
I was going to ask about her voice because it did not really match her. Like, the voiceover was not good. I don't know if it was ADR work or if she had an accent coach. I don't know.
She was actually completely dubbed over by Nikki van der Zyl, who actually did some dubbing for some of the other female characters in some of the early Bond movies because Andress's Swedish accent was a little too thick.
Oh, I see.
Andress also appeared in The 10th Victim and the Hammer horror movie She, as well as playing Vesper Lynn in the spoof film Casino Royale, and Aphrodite in Clash of the Titans.
Her best role.
She also won a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year for her role in this movie, and was cast at the last...
Okay, hold on.
Yeah.
I'm not saying she's a bad actress. The role never should have been up for any awards. And she got that award because she was in a bikini the whole time. And I do think it is kind of brave to decide to go into a movie and basically just wear a bikini the whole time. But, I mean, really, that's why she was nominated and that's why she got a Golden Globe.
Pretty much, yeah.
Like, she was in a white bikini. She was in the water all the time.
It's not a really challenging role.
No,
for the most part, dramatically.
This movie made me mad. This movie made me very mad. So you're going to hear a lot about that.
That's fine. Fittingly, she was cast last minute based solely on a photograph that was taken by her husband, John Derek.
That'd do it.
The director had spotted the picture when he was at Daryl Zanuck's house and asked, "Who is this girl?" and found out, sent her the script, and Kirk Douglas supposedly urged her to take the role after they read the script together at a party. He thought it would be fun. Among those considered for the role was Julie Christie, which I think is definitely a case of an actress who's much too good for this kind of part. There's really not much for her here. Her iconic bikini helped bolster sales of bikinis in the 1960s. One of the costumes actually sold for £41,000 in 2001 at auction. And Ian Fleming was so impressed by her, when he visited the set, he worked in a reference to her in the next Bond novel that he was writing, On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh.
I will say, in the original book, she is a much stronger character.
I should hope so, because she couldn't get weaker. She could not get more helpless than she was in this film. She's running around the island alone in a bikini. She's doing dangerous work, even though, you know, it may seem like, hey, fun, she's in a bikini. She's going around the island collecting shells, but she's in real danger every time she goes on this island to collect those shells. She could be murdered any minute. She knows how to get in. She knows how to get out. Bond gets in her way. Bond makes it impossible for her to do her job the way she's been doing her job, and he just screws everything up. So she ends up in a situation where he has to rescue her, but wait a minute, she's leading him through the swamp, and she's telling him how to get keep mosquitoes off of him, and we're supposed to take that as a development of character. But with her, the development of character really comes from Bond, how he sees her and how we're supposed to see her. So we see her through Bond's eyes. And there's a scene where she's trying to tell him about, how her father had died. She was basically raised by her dad alone. She never went to school. She didn't have any other family members. They traveled everywhere. And when he passed away, she was taken advantage of by her landlord.
Well, there was this man who owned the place where we were living. He let me stay on for a while without paying. Then one night he came up to my room. Well, you know. I scratched his face, and then... But he was stronger than I was.
And what happened after that?
I put a black widow spider underneath his mosquito net. A female, and they're the worst. It took him a whole week to die. What did I do wrong?
Well, it wouldn't do to make a habit of it.
We're seeing her through Bond's eyes, and she, out of her mouth, is saying the females, they're the worst. They'll kill you. They're deadly. The females are deadly. So we're already getting reinforced that they're pretty but deadly. Don't get near this woman. But then he scolds her. She asks, because he looks so affronted that she could have retaliated against her rapist, that she asks if she did something wrong. Was it wrong that I did that? And he's like, well, don't make a habit of it. He just murdered how many people for less personal reasons than rape? And he's going to scold her like she's a child for defending herself, really. I mean, it may have been, an after the fact kind of revenge, but she was defending herself.
What really bothers me is that in the book, there's that scene where Dr. No has her sent away, and originally he has her chained down into this ramp where water's going to come in and crabs are going to eat her. And in the end, Bond is running around this base trying to find her, and instead of pulling her out and rescuing her, she just bumps into her in a corner and goes, oh yeah, I got myself free. It was easy. The crabs just walked right by me. Crabs don't attack people like that. I knew that because I know animals. I'm fine. Let's go. Let's get out of here. This idea that she could totally take care of herself.
Well, that's the thing, is that she can. She's shown us very obliquely that she can take care of herself because she does a dangerous job, and she has been doing it for quite some time. It's Bond coming into her life that has screwed everything up for her. In fact, Bond seems to do that for everybody.
He does tend to...
He is the worst spy.
He just kind of shows up in a situation, causes trouble, throws everything around, trying to get at what's happening. And yeah, a lot of people get hurt as a result.
That didn't need to get hurt. And this is actually a theme that we see through all of the Bond films. I would say it's one of the traits that they've kept with Bond is that people get hurt. No matter what he does, for whatever reasons, he's trying to do good, or what he thinks is good, or what his government thinks is good, but he's getting he's got all this collateral damage.
And that's something they become a little bit more aware of as the series goes on and becomes more of a plot point. Whereas here it's just tossed aside like, oh, well, happens in the line of duty. Later on it becomes much more part of his character that, yeah, he causes all this damage and is aware of it. Which unfortunately leads to a lot of fridging of female characters.
Oh my gosh. James Bond films and the fridging of women, somebody has to have written an academic paper on this because it is a gold mine.
Next we have the title character, Joseph Wiseman as Dr. No, which... boy, this is where it gets really problematic.
Are you sure? Because I think it's already problematic.
Well, it gets more problematic.
Well, it's equal opportunity problematic.
Yes, now we're going to broaden it out.
Yes.
Wiseman also appeared in Detective Story, The Silver Chalice with Paul Newman, and The Apprenticeship of Dunny Kravitz with Richard Dreyfuss. I always remember him from the Twilight Zone episode One More Pallbearer, where he's the crazy guy who builds the bomb shelter in his building. It was his role in Detective Story that brought him to the attention of producer Harry Saltzman, who gave him the role. And here's the thing. It's a straight-out Yellow Peril role, which is really disgusting. But on the other hand, Wiseman is actually really good. He's very scary in the part.
He is scary in the part. I think that's mainly because his delivery is one note. It's all very flat. He has no expression. And that void of humanity can be really frightening.
With your disregard for human life, you must be working for the East.
East, west, just points of the compass, each as stupid as the other. I'm a member of Spectre.
Spectre?
Spectre. Special Executive for Counterintelligence, Terrorism, Revenge, Extortion. The 4 great cornerstones of power, headed by the greatest brains in the world.
Correction. Criminal brains.
The successful criminal brain is always superior. It has to be.
As far as the yellow face goes, I'm rolling my eyes right now because I just can't handle it. And it happens several times, several actors.
I'm not sure what offends me more. He's supposed to be of Chinese and German descent, so they don't know if they really had to go with the makeup and everything like that.
Yeah.
Or the fact that they didn't cast an Asian actor in the part.
Yeah.
Either way, it's pretty bad.
Also, there was this theme with the 2 characters who they put in yellowface, and forgive me if that isn't the correct term. They were both half Asian, half something else. We get the photographer earlier on, wasn't she? She was half American, half Japanese, was it?
They never really specify.
I thought they said Japanese.
I'm not sure. I don't think so, but...
And Dr. No is half German, half Chinese. And there's this implied biracial issue where, you know, if you're in this movie, if you're biracial, you don't belong anywhere, and therefore you will take your revenge on everyone.
Which continued in the book, where all of his people in the book are half Chinese and half black.
Yeah.
Which, at the time, they was sort of portrayed as, the worst of all the other races thrown together.
God.
It was pretty ugly, yeah.
Makes me mad.
Well, also, I get the sense that he's almost supposed to represent the old threat and the new threat for British viewers. That he's half German, okay, we just got out of World War II and dealt with the Nazis, and he's half Chinese, which is the communist threat. So we'll take the 2 things that we don't like and throw them together into one bad guy.
Yeah.
Among those considered for the part, Noel Coward was offered the role, but refused with style. He sent a telegram reading, "Dr. No, 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 no."
Good for him.
Fleming suggested his cousin Christopher Lee for the part, but
I'm glad his cousin Christopher Lee declined.
Well, he might have been busy with other things, but he'd get his shot playing a Bond bad guy once we got to The Man with the Golden Gun in the Roger Moore era. Max von Sydow was also offered the role, but turned it down to play Jesus in The Greatest Story Ever Told. He'd also get his chance to play a Bond villain in Never Say Never Again, where he plays Blofeld. It is interesting to note that in the original book, he actually is working for the Russians, but for the movie they decide to bring in Spectre. It's like they want to take out a little bit of the actual political dimension to it and give it something a little bit more fanciful. There is one element to the characterization I find interesting, this idea of Dr. No, who is this very cool, calm megalomaniac, but also is really this kind of insecure prat when it comes down to it. It's like, the Americans didn't want my help, the Russians didn't want my help, I'm going to get them all.
Why become criminal? I'm sure the West would welcome a scientist of your caliber.
The Americans are fools. I offered my services, they refused. So did the East. Now they can both pay for their mistake.
And we see it reflected in things like the set design, where Professor Dent comes in for a meeting, and he doesn't meet with him, he puts him in this giant, overpowering room. Or the thing with the aquarium, where he has these tiny fish that look like whales, and as Bond says, minnows pretending to be whales, is this sense of this guy, yeah, I know, we're going to have a lot of bad Connery impersonation in this one, we apologize in advance, this sense of this guy overcompensating for this inferiority complex.
Okay, so Dr. No has been knocking over missiles, or as they say in the movie, toppling missiles. This is like a kindergartner coming over to somebody else's tower of blocks and kicking it over. It is pointless. It is completely pointless. He's calling it a show of power. What is this showing? This is not showing power. Nobody knows who you are or why you're doing this. Why the missiles? No one knows. And supposedly, somehow, he has built this secret nuclear reactor in the middle of the Caribbean. And he's using that to knock over missiles. So he's not just kicking blocks with his feet. He's getting a wrecking ball and kicking them over. It's overkill. It is overkill.
Going back to that insecurity thing, I think it's notable that what is he knocking down? Very phallic objects.
Yeah.
In the book, there was an explanation for it, that he was toppling these missiles and then recovering them from the ocean and turning them over to the Russians. So there was at least something to it, But yeah, here it's just kind of like...
There was no point.
I'm going to be bad. There's no... Most of these movies, the villain has some kind of master plan that's going to lead to something.
No, the villain's master plan here was, I'm going to topple over missiles. And there were no real stakes, because we don't know if these missiles have people in them.
Well, this one they do announce that it was a manned mission around the moon.
It was a manned mission.
So
okay.
It's this race to save like 4 astronauts. As Bond is going to kill about 12 people or 24 people to do it in the meantime.
More than 24 people, because at the end of everything, because we haven't had enough overreaction, the reactor overheats and explodes, and now everybody in the next 100 miles is dead. Everybody's dead. Everybody in that movie who couldn't get out of the reactor before it started spurting off steam, they're all dead. James Bond is dead. James Bond, if he's alive and we can accept that this nuclear reactor somehow did not kill him, he's a mutant. Just collect him up and make him part of Marvel.
Maybe it would this leads to the creation of Godzilla. That'll be the James Bond versus Godzilla.
I don't know that I would watch that. He'd probably hit on Godzilla.
Oh, or Mothra.
Hey, Godzilla. Hey.
Hey, Mothra, your wings are quite impressive. That's quite a wingspan you have.
But, I mean, as far as collateral damage goes, there's no scale here. The bad guy's gonna topple over a missile that has 4 people in it. Okay, well, I'm just gonna save the day by blowing up a nuclear reactor.
Another thing about Dr. No, which actually does influence other Bond villains, is this thing of most Bond villains having some kind of abnormality or deformity or disability that separates them, that shows where Bond is like this perfect specimen of manhood. The villains always have something that's a little wrong with them. In this case, he has his metal hands that he uses to squash things and such. That's another element of the Bond villain thing I always find a little disturbing.
It's tacky. I mean, if you look different, then you are evil.
Still even going on in the Daniel Craig thing,
Yeah.
where Le Chiffre has the weeping blood thing. That's, again, that weird, bizarre trait that he has that separates him from everybody else. Javier Bardem's character has the thing with his teeth. There's always something that makes them a little odd. Next we have Bond's ally, Jack Lord, playing the character of Felix Leiter. Leiter actually doesn't appear in the novel, though he's a recurring character from other Bond books. Of course, Lord is best known as Steve McGarrett from Hawaii Five-0, and also appeared on television in Stony Burke, and nearly played both Elliot Ness in The Untouchables and Captain Kirk on Star Trek. And it seems like he's mostly here to kind of show how much superior James Bond is. That he's the American agent who just kind of stands around and goes, yep, don't know what's going on, don't know what you think you're doing, Bond, you won't find anything out there. Oh, look, he found it. Hey, wow, good job.
Yeah.
Well, there you are. Cape Canaveral is screaming because with this moon rocket launching schedule, they don't want anything to go wrong.
And yet you say Strangways didn't think the interference could be coming from here.
Right.
I suppose you cased the joint?
Yeah, I checked, unofficially. You limeys can be pretty touchy about trespassing, you know.
They follow around Bond. Bond leads them to something so they can possibly take the glory.
Leiter maybe will supply him with something that he needs, like,
Yeah.
hand me that box, give me a Geiger counter, give me this special gun, but that's about it. He's mostly, or he'll bring in the cavalry, usually too late to do anything, just
Of
after
course.
Bond has already wiped out all the bad guys. He asked for a higher salary after this and more prominent billing for Goldfinger, and that ended with him being replaced by Sek Linder. Over the series, and including the separate spin-off one, Never Say Never Again, the role will be played by 6 other actors, including David Hedison, and most recently Jeffrey Wright in the Daniel Craig series.
Felix is one of those characters who I never remember. Like, who is Felix? Who is this guy? Why is he even here?
The biggest use I think they find for him is later on when he gets maimed in License to Kill, and then Bond has to avenge him. That's pretty much it. Otherwise, yeah, he's just usually standing around going, oh, that James Bond, what a card, ha. Next is John Kitzmiller as Quarrel. Though born in America, Kitzmiller actually worked most of his career in Italy, when, unfortunately, as a black actor, he just couldn't get parts in America. He moved to Italy.
Big surprise in the 60s?
Yeah,
Big surprise.
I know. But in Italy, he appeared in movies like Without Pity and Valley of Peace, and won the Best Actor award at the Cannes Film Festival, and became the first black actor to do so. And he'd also appear in the 1965 adaptation of Uncle Tom's Cabin, alongside Herbert Lom. And yet another problematic part, because in the books, he's portrayed as much more of an equal to Bond, that he's kind of his ally and is actually quite smart and advises him on things to do. Here, he is kind of the goofy black guy. He buys into the native superstitions of the dragon on the island, even after he sees tire tracks.
He knows what cars look like. He's seen automobiles and machines. They don't live on a desert island. They live in a place where there's boats, which he uses, and machinery, woo. And he's a minstrel character, and it really bothers me. It really, really bothers me. He's made to walk after James Bond and kind of just give him whatever he needs. Like, James Bond loses his shoes, and he says, "Fetch my shoes." I know, as we were watching that, I'm like, really?
When they hide the boat, they land on the island. It's like, cover that over. I'm going to go get some sleep. Yeah, he's basically around to practically carries his golf clubs.
He's his manservant. Mm-hmm. It's the worst. It's the worst. And on top of it, they put him in a red shirt. And then James Bond uses him as bait for the quote-unquote dragon.
I'm not sure it's much that he uses him as bait as the characters.
He's in a bright red shirt. He's going to be seen. Here, you go in front of me.
Well, he just says, go shoot out the thing. The character runs up forward, but doesn't move when this vehicle is coming right up to shoot him. Either way, it doesn't reflect well on the character. But
not at all.
I also noticed that in the first scene where he's introduced, he's painting the boat with red paint that looks like blood. It's like, could we set up any more that this guy's going to meet a bad end?
He always refers to him as Mr. Bond
or Captain. Yeah. Or, when they ask for the coordinates of the island. Like,
all right, Quarrel. We don't want to force you to do anything. Lighter and I will go over after dark if you'll give us the navigational directions.
I get my navigational directions from my nose, my ears, from my instincts. Anyway, I'll be here about 7.
Yeah.
He's not sophisticated enough to use coordinates or compasses or maps or anything. He just, it's really, really offensive. And actually, the character, this isn't his first appearance, at least in the novels. He actually would appear in Live and Let Die, which the book is set before this, but the movie after. And in the movie, when they came to that one, they actually had it be his son who helps Bond in that one. But, because he was previously in the series, by the time they get to this part in the book, he and Bond were trusted friends. It wasn't this manservant kind of thing.
Yeah.
He was an equal to him, and that's really lost in the movie, to the film's detriment. Next is Anthony Dawson as Professor R.J. Dent. Dawson might look familiar as the blackmailed murderer for hire from Hitchcock's Dial M for Murder. He'd also appear in the Hammer horror film Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed, The Jigsaw Man, Roman Polanski's Pirates, and Ghoulies 2. And he'd actually played Blofeld, or the barely glimpsed form of Blofeld, in From Russia with Love and Thunderball, though somebody else provided the voice. And another thing about Bond movies is there's always a colorful henchman generally. You have Odd Job with the hat, you have Xenia Onatopp in GoldenEye, you have all these crazy henchman characters. And we don't really get much of that here. We get the 3 blind mice and Dent, and that's pretty much it.
I don't necessarily think that Dent is the henchman. He's kind of like the errand boy. I gotta go run and tell him that this is happening. He might know.
Why have you disobeyed my strictest rule and come in daylight?
I had to. Bond came to see me this morning.
Yes, I know. I gave orders that he should be killed. Why is he still alive?
Our attempts failed.
Your attempts failed. I do not like failure. You are not going to fail me again, Professor.
No. I came to warn you.
Warn me.
Tell you.
But in the sense, he's also the guy that he sends to kill Bond initially, so...
Oh, see, I had forgotten that.
Compared to other henchmen, he's really looks ineffectual. We know immediately there's no way this guy's going to be a threat to Bond, really, other than the little spider he lets out in his room. And we also never really get a sense of why he's cooperating with No. I assume it's just money, but...
A missed opportunity for this. They introduced the use of a spider for a possible murder, and then they have an anecdote later of a spider that was successfully used as a murder weapon, and they never linked them. And that was a really screenwriting missed opportunity.
I always assumed that was the reason that Connery has that expression when he hears her story, that kind of ugh, because he certainly doesn't seem to like the spider in that scene. Next we come to Bernard Lee as M. Lee may also be familiar as the friendly military police sergeant in The Third Man, and would also work for Carol Reed in The Fallen Idol. He'd also appear in Beat the Devil with Humphrey Bogart, The Battle of the River Plate with Peter Finch, and Frankenstein the Monster from Hell, and would go on to play M in 11 of the Bond movies, dying just before production on For Your Eyes Only, where his role was not recast for that film out of respect. He was asked to play the role only days before they actually started filming on Dr. No, and considering he probably didn't have much prep, I think he's actually really good for the brief appearance.
I think he's great. I really enjoy him as M. He's got that kind of quiet authority, and he realizes at the same time James Bond is going to do whatever the hell he wants.
Well, there's that combination of he knows Bond's effective, but he also doesn't approve of him and snaps at him and kind of reprimands him whenever he has the chance, which I like.
Any comment, 007?
I disagree, sir. I've used the Beretta for 10 years. I've never missed with a jet.
Yeah, maybe not, but it jammed on your last job and you spent 6 months in hospital in consequence. If you carry a 00 number, it means you're licensed to kill, not get killed. And another thing, since I've been head of MI7, there's been a 40% drop in 00 operative casualties, and I want it to stay that way. You'll carry the water. Unless, of course, you prefer to go back to standard intelligence duties.
No, sir. I would not.
Then from now on, you carry a different gun. Show him, Amra.
He's probably, in the film series, the closest they come to the literary version, because that is pretty much the character from the book, too. He would actually spoof his M role in several films, including OK Connery and From Hong Kong with Love, both times alongside Lois Maxwell. And he's actually Johnny Lee Miller's grandfather, which is kind of funny considering Johnny Lee Miller played Sick Boy, who has the Sean Connery obsession in Trainspotting. And alongside him, of course, is Lois Maxwell as Moneypenny. Maxwell's Canadian, born in Ontario, and started out performing for troops as part of the Canadian Women's Army Corps. She won a Most Promising Newcomer Golden Globe for her role in That Hagen Girl. Okay, she deserves a Golden Globe, I'd say. With Shirley Temple. She'd also appear in television programs such as The Saint and Danger Man, and would appear alongside Richard Johnson in The Haunting as his skeptical wife. She'd actually play Moneypenny through the series right to the end of the Roger Moore era. She actually wanted her character killed off at that point, but they refused to do it and recast the role with Caroline Bliss. And she seems to function to not only remind the audience how attractive Bond is, but also to kind of humanize him slightly. I mean, she's the only woman that he's not quite as callous with as he is with other people.
Well, I think she's the only woman in this movie who realizes that he's full of shit. He's absolutely full of shit. And she'll sweet talk him right back because she knows he doesn't have the goods to go all the way. He is not going to fall in love with her and have it be some sort of stable relationship because he can't do that. She's in his world. So I think, honestly, she has the better of him in this situation. She knows his number.
Moneypenny. What gives?
Me, given an ounce of encouragement. You never take me to dinner looking like this, James. You never take me to dinner, period.
I would, you know. Only Anne would have me court-martialed for illegal use of government property.
Flattery will get you nowhere, but don't stop trying.
I think a little of that goes the other way, too, that he doesn't get involved with her because he knows he's an asshole and is going to break her heart.
I don't think it's that he knows he's an asshole, because I don't think he knows he's an asshole. I think he doesn't get involved with her specifically because she's in his real life, not his spy life. Even if his spy life is a real life, he can't just up and walk away from Moneypenny because she's always going to be there in M's office. He'd have to face any damage to a woman that he does. He would have to face her, and he can't do that. That's why he's not going to get in a relationship with Moneypenny.
I do feel there's a bit of genuine affection there.
There is.
That goes beyond that he doesn't have with the other women.
There's definitely genuine affection on both sides, even though she knows he's kind of a scumbag. There's a kind of safety in that work flirting relationship thing that I know a lot of people find. I think it's a little weird, but it won't go any further. And I think even in real life, it doesn't go further because you have to see that person. Your only choice is to quit your job if this gets screwed up.
Another of Bond's conquests in the film is Eunice Gayson, playing Sylvia Trench. Gayson also appeared in The Revenge of Frankenstein, as well as making guest appearances on Danger Man, The Saint, and The Avengers. She had almost been cast as Moneypenny and is officially the first Bond girl, really, and is also one of his few lovers to actually return in another film, appearing again in From Russia with Love. They had intended to make her almost a kind of a semi-regular girlfriend for him, which would have made his dalliances with other women seem a little bit nastier. But because of a switch in directors, she never appeared again after that film, and that was pretty much it. I do like that her character seems to be kind of enjoying the game as much as Connery, that she's kind of out to get him as much as he's out to get other women.
She sees he's attractive, he possibly is money, he seems smooth in that one moment. So yeah, she goes after him, and she is the creeper in this instance, in that she breaks into his apartment and wears his clothing.
How did you get in here? Never mind that now, you're here.
I decided to accept your invitation.
Oh, that was for tomorrow afternoon. Tell me, do you always dress this way for golf?
I changed into something more comfortable. Oh, I hope I did the right thing.
Well, you did the right thing, but you picked the wrong moment. I have to leave immediately.
Oh, that's too bad. Just as things were getting interesting again.
It's really creepy. And we're supposed to be okay with this breaking in and wearing of clothes because she's hot. And James Bond is okay with it because of the same thing. But in real life, if someone broke into your house, like some stranger that you just met at a bar, broke into your house and was wearing your clothing when you came home, you'd call the cops.
Well, especially if you're a spy, having somebody suddenly break in your apartment, that's like a security issue right there.
Yeah, how does she know where he lives? She's smarter than James Bond, apparently.
But I like that she's sexually aggressive, but is never shamed for it or made to pay for it like other characters in the series might later on. That it's okay, you know, she's kind of having fun with him, he's having fun with her, they're kind of on an equal level.
Yeah.
That's kind of refreshing, and I do kind of wish they would have brought her character back more often after that.
That encounter, the equal footing, it's forgotten in the wash of just bad stuff that happens throughout the rest of the movie. If there had been some kind of balance to this at all, it would be more memorable. Hate this movie.
Okay, let's move on to Zena Marshall as Miss Taro, another one of Dr. No's henchmen, or henchwomen in this case. Don't have much of a filmography for her.
More yellow face.
She is definitely the femme fatale character that we usually get in these movies. Usually at least one Bond girl is the villainous type who tries to seduce Bond, or oftentimes kind of mixes sex with violence, as we'll get into in later ones.
I think he does the same. And in a way, the perfect woman for James Bond would be one of these villainesses. I remember having a huge problem with this as well. I know. Surprise! I have a problem with this movie. Yeah, she's in it to get him. She is the deadly Spider Woman. She's that female Black Widow that Honey talks about later. But we're supposed to be okay with the fact that he knows that she's after him. So he sleeps with her to just play along with it. And then gets her out of the way. So it's supposed to be okay that he has manipulated her sexually. Yes, she went into that experience, or whatever you want to call it, willingly. But it was under, I don't want to say false pretenses because they're kind of playing each other. But there's something really disgusting about that to me.
I will give Marshall credit. I do love her reaction when she opens the door to find Bond coming in after she assumed that he was going to get killed on the road, and has that, oh, hi,
yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, I feel bad for her in that moment because she's like, oh shit, now I have to sleep with him. I have to. I have no choice now. And he knows that. It is so disgusting.
It's a little slimy. I don't want to say it's mitigated by the fact that she just tried to kill him and tries again right after that.
I should feel like, oh, okay, well, you know, she did just try to kill him. But for some reason, it is not justifiable. I just can't. I don't care if she just tried to kill him. She could have killed somebody that he loved. I don't care. He's a scumbag.
The last one we'll talk about is Marguerite Loire, who plays the photographer who encounters Bond at the airport in the nightclub. She was crowned as Miss Jamaica at the time of filming and was actually cast after director Terence Young spotted her at the Kingston airport working at the first class counter. She actually tested for the part of Miss Taro, but was reluctant to do it due to the love scene, and also wore makeup to make her look Asian, albeit a little bit more subtly than some of the other characters.
Well, it was more subtle because they had her character written as half Asian, half American. Horrible that they would give her any makeup like that to begin with. I hate this movie. There's just no need for yellow face or black face.
It's one of those unfortunate things, and it's really annoying when it crops up in really good movies like Lawrence of Arabia, for example.
Yeah.
But it was so common at the time, it wasn't even thought about very much.
See, that's the problem with something like Lawrence of Arabia, is that is truly a masterpiece. That movie is a masterpiece. And then you run into something like that, and it's completely out of place. And I'm not saying you're more forgiving of it, but you're like, oh, it was such a great movie, except that one thing. But James Bond, with Dr. No, that one thing is one of many things wrong with this film.
Especially in the second half, there are tons of Asian actors and actresses running around.
Yes.
You have, Sister Rose and Sister Lily, who are working in
Yes.
Dr. No's evil health spa. You could have cast either of them as Miss Taro or the photographer, and they were both pretty good actors from what we see in those scenes. Why not just cast them?
Yeah.
But let's move on to the crew. The director is Terrence Young. Young began as a screenwriter, writing scripts for movies such as On the Night of the Fire and Dangerous Moonlight. Besides directing this film and 2 subsequent Bond films, From Russia with Love and Thunderball, he'd also direct Wait Until Dark with Audrey Hepburn, The Valachi Papers, and The Jigsaw Man. He was, as I said, supposedly the one who educated Connery on how to play a smooth, refined gentleman for the role. Directors who were considered for it included Guy Hamilton, who would later direct 4 Bond movies, including Goldfinger and Live and Let Die, and Val Guest, director of a lot of Hammer sci-fi movies such as The Abominable Snowman and the Bond spoof Casino Royale. I do like how, during Bond's big intro scene, he puts off the close-up of Bond for as long as possible, where there's always just something in the way of Bond's face, like another person at the baccarat table, or he's just out of the frame.
I think the most successful piece of direction was that introduction of James Bond.
I admire your courage, Miss...
Trench. Sylvia Trench. I admire your luck, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
It didn't smack of, I am directing the hell out of this scene, but it was really good the way he held off. And the first time you see him is when we get introduced. And that's how icons are made. But the rest of the film, direction-wise, felt really straightforward. I didn't see any shots and think, oh, that is beautiful, or I see what you did there. It was just very straightforward directing.
There's a couple. I'd say he's actually very good at entrances. Besides Bond's, you have Ursula Andress's Coming Out of the Sea, which is an iconic shot.
It is. You're right.
And Dr. No's entrance, where we don't see him at first, just the door open in the shadow, and he walks in, and again, we don't see his face until the big dinner scene. I think that is a really good, creepy intro for him as well.
That was just strange. I don't know why a villain would decide to just take a peek on his drugged prisoners.
Maybe it goes to the insecurity thing again. He wants to check what Bond's packing for weapons.
I still think he wanted to read him a bedtime story and just came in a little too late.
Well, that is another element missing from the book, where one of Dr. No's habits was to study the human threshold of pain, and there was a scene when they're both drugged where he pulls the blankets off both him and Honey Rider and basically checks out their physical form to decide what he's going to do to them later. There's a lot of stuff from the book that's missing that I think would have explained a lot of the weirder bits. I will say Young's directing of action scenes is really, really odd. He tends to shoot a lot of master shots, wide shots to cover action scenes, like the fight scenes where it would be like a wide shot of somebody fighting, only occasionally cutting in for a close-up, and oftentimes it is kind of jarring when he does. It doesn't quite fit. The editor, Peter Hunt, supposedly said that he oftentimes wouldn't allow enough coverage, so you can see a lot of times there's weird jump cuts in scenes, like the scene where Strangway's secretary is killed, where all of a sudden there's a jump and she's shot again, and frames are dropped just to speed it up, stuff like that. Which kind of became how he directed a lot of the action scenes for these movies, but it's really, really odd.
It's a style that, if it had been pushed further, it would have been seen as a purposeful direction. But because of the way it was done, it just looked like a sloppy accident.
It could have been a French New Wave kind of approach to action movies or something. We do have to mention the producers on this film series, Albert Broccoli and Harry Saltzman. Broccoli was born in America and produced movies like The Red Beret and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. He would team up with Harry Saltzman, who had been a talent agent before becoming a theatrical producer, and produced movies like Look Back in Anger and Saturday Night and Sunday Morning.
How could you go from movies like that to James Bond?
Money.
Oh, yeah, money. But they didn't know it was going to make money.
Well, the book series was getting pretty successful at that point, and they poured a lot of money in this, so clearly they thought there was potential there. He would later produce another spy film series, the Harry Palmer films with Michael Caine. After reading Goldfinger, he purchased the film rights to Bond, and then he would team up with Broccoli and United Artists, and they'd form the companies Dan Jack and Eon Productions to produce the movies. They remained a team on them until the late 1970s, when Saltzman left due to interest in making other movies and financial problems. And the control they have, it kind of reminds me of what we're seeing now with the Marvel series. You have really a producer-driven series where it's not about auteurs, it's not about bringing big artistic directors. You bring in directors who are going to do the job, follow within these certain guidelines, and kind of make the product they want. And
it's an assembly line movie.
Pretty much, yeah. The film was written by Richard Maibaum, Joanna Harwood, and Berkeley Mather. Going back to the source material, the story actually began as a television pilot script for a series called Commander Jamaica, and when the show wasn't produced, Fleming recycled the plot for this, which is something he'd get in trouble for later on with Thunderball. Maibaum also wrote scripts for an adaptation of The Great Gatsby and the original film of Ransom, the one that they remade with Mel Gibson later. He would contribute to the majority of Bond film scripts up until License to Kill. Now, his first version of the script was co-written with Wolf Mankiewicz, who later asked for his name to be removed from it.
Good, I would have too.
Allegedly, I don't know if it's true, in that script, the Dr. No character was turned into a monkey, so read into that what you will. He was going to be the pet of the film's villain, who was a shipping magnate in that one. Later on, Joanna Harwood, who worked with producer Harry Saltzman, would be brought in to co-write it, and she'd actually bring the script closer in line to the original novel and inject more of a British sensibility to it.
Not enough.
Their co-writer Mather was a former soldier and novelist who wrote spy thrillers such as The Achilles Affair and The Terminators, which earned praise from Ian Fleming, and he'd serve as a script doctor in From Russia with Love and Goldfinger later on in the series. Some of the differences from the book, and this is one thing that kind of throws me. The movie has
terrible.
All right, well, beyond that, the movie has the setup of an action movie in that it's not really a mystery. We know who the bad guy is. We know where the bad guy's operating from. It's more just a matter of getting the good guy there, and hopefully action scenes would come out of it. But there's not a lot of action in the movie, really.
No.
There's a couple of fights, there's a car chase, and one of the big differences from the book is they remove the section that I think would have been the big action scene. It's actually a great, great scene in the book. After Bond is captured, he's put in a cell, and rather than just escape, Dr. No actually puts him through this obstacle course and is walking alongside, monitoring the whole time. That scene where he's walking through the tunnels and the vents, it wasn't that he escaped. That was designed for him to go through as a test. He'd have to go through, like, the electricity thing first, and then steaming hot pipes, and then killer spiders, and eventually he gets dumped out into this pen in the ocean where he fights a squid. It was this...
I wish I had seen that, because I'd have something to treasure.
Mm-hmm.
The battling a squid, why not?
And it's a great scene because it lets us see Bond's ingenuity, that he's making makeshift weapons out of anything he can find in the tunnels and trying to come up with clever ways to elude all these different threats. And it's a really good suspenseful scene, and without it, it's just kind of like Bond's in a cell, he kicks open a grate, he goes through a tunnel, finale, boom. Most Bond movies have at least one big finale action scene, and this only kind of has a fight over steaming water, and that's about it. So I think that was a big, big loss. They really should have filmed that whole scene. Plus, it's creepy that he'd go through this horrible, dangerous thing, look up, see a window, and see Dr. No or one of his scientists just looking at him, jotting down notes, noting how he's doing. It was really, really creepy. As I mentioned, originally Honey Rider freed herself from her death trap and was depicted as being much more self-sufficient than she is in the film.
I just don't understand why that needed to be changed, why she needed to be weakened as a character, because everything that they took out from her character, if it had been in there, would not have gotten in the way of the story at all.
Well, everything in these scripts seems to be designed to make Bond seem that much cooler, so having him rescue one more person, I think.
I mean, he doesn't rescue anybody.
Well, she's the only one, really, that he does, yeah. The other big change is the final fate of Dr. No. In the movie, they fight over the nuclear reactor, and he eventually falls into the boiling water and is boiled to death. In the book, he's actually operating a bird guano mine. He's exporting bird guano, I think, as fertilizer. And Bond maneuvers some of the machinery and basically buries him in bird guano, which is an appropriately disgusting death.
Again, I wish they'd stuck with the novel version, because that's kind of humorous. Disgusting and humorous.
I guess without the obstacle course, they decided they needed some kind of fight, and I do kind of like the last fight scene. I think it's pretty well staged, even if it's completely ridiculous, because both of them would be dying from radiation at that exposure. But.
Yep.
Let's talk about the cinematography. The movie was shot by Ted Moore. Moore began his career as a camera operator on films such as The African Queen and the Red Beret, and would work on 7 Bond films in total, in addition to movies like The Day of the Triffids, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, and Orca. And I will say, I do think, while some of it is pedestrian, there is some very pretty shooting, especially the scenes on Crab Key. The whole scene where they're being stalked through the swamp, I really like the way it's shot, not just in terms of the colors, but the low angles over the water as all of the guards guys are starting to move into the area. There's little touches like that that are very good. And I will say, I think he shoots Ken Adams' sets very, very well. The editor for the film was Peter Hunt, who would edit 5 James Bond movies, up to You Only Live Twice, and would actually direct On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And he used some techniques that were kind of groundbreaking at the time, such as fast motion and cutting off movement, which you actually didn't see very much in movies up to that point. But as I said, he was limited by the amount of footage that Terrence Young would provide. So the fast cutting was often to cover over the fact that they just didn't have a lot of footage for certain action scenes and fight scenes. I will give Hunt credit for some of the things that he had to cover in terms of the production not getting the shot they needed. The scene where the blind mice assassins are going to shoot him outside of the club and are interrupted by a car headlight. They didn't have the shot, so basically he turned up the brightness of the frame to simulate the car headlights. And it actually works pretty well in the movie. If you don't know that's what he did, it covers pretty well.
Yeah.
But also the scene, the big dinner scene with Dr. No's aquarium, the stock footage they got, they didn't get enough. They only had a few seconds worth, so he had to keep using quick cutting during the scene to cover the fact that the end of the film would spool out.
Oh my God.
All right, here we come to the one thing I think is undeniably great in the movie. That's the production design by Ken Adam, because this guy designed some really, really gorgeous sets for this movie.
I don't think they're gorgeous. I think they're dated. I think at the time they were very impressive. They're definitely distinctive. They're definitely different environments. Every single place he goes to has a different feel. That's important. But it felt like a standard sci-fi fantasy movie set in that, you know, okay, well, it looks undeniably from this era, but we put a spin on it. Now you're in a cave kind of thing.
Well, I think the thing is, a lot of that is his sets were so influential, they kind of seeped into other science fiction movies and things like that. But there's a lot of subtle things, like how Bond's apartment is decorated with all this sportsman stuff, or M's office is very simple and conservative but has a lot of naval decorations on the wall to imply the fact that he comes from a British Navy background. Again, Dr. No's ridiculous meeting room that has a giant grate that suggests the spider web, since he's going to give the guy a spider, and is totally ridiculous that he's going to have a meeting, he's not even in the room, and it has this hugely oversized room with a tiny little chair and this giant, very imprisoning looking grate.
There's also, and I'm not sure if this was set dressing or if it was part of the design, Honey's bed inside the, what are we calling it? The bad man's cave?
The lair.
The headboard was shaped like a heart, which was really painful to see.
I also like the weird angles that his sets have. I mean, there's always something kind of askew. There's not a lot of real symmetry to them often. Ceiling will jut out at weird angles. The wall will bend at a weird angle that doesn't seem quite right. A lot of reflective materials, lots of like coppery surfaces.
I was watching some of the copper surfaces because I was wondering if it had been painted or if they had gotten the hammered copper sheets. It reflected really well, and I think that that may have been my favorite part of the movie.
But his designs, I think, are influential in that in the rest of the Bond movies, usually the villain will have some kind of ridiculous, crazy lair, and a lot of times they follow along this design aesthetic. Getting to Adam, though, he began his film design career working on the horror movie Night of the Demon, and we'd create designs for movies such as The Ipcress Files, Sleuth, Barry Lyndon. And his work from this actually inspired Stanley Kubrick to hire him to design the sets for Dr. Strangelove, including that amazing set of the War Room that is now iconic. Quickly, let's get into the music. The music is by Monty Norman and John Barry. Norman wrote songs for musicals such as Make Me an Offer and Songbook, and only agreed to compose the music for the movie when he learned he could actually travel to Jamaica with the crew.
There was very little music in this film. There's the theme, which, of course, everybody knows. And that was the strongest piece of music throughout the entire film. The other music of note was a song that they played over and over. It didn't seem like they had a lot in terms of music. It just seemed like transition pieces.
And there's a lot of confusion about who wrote what for the score, because John Barry would claim that he actually did the James Bond theme. Norman claimed he based it off of one of his previous works, a song from the production house of Mr. Biswas, this song Good Sign, Bad Sign, that he just kind of speeded up and added a little bit more to. I do like John Barry's music in other films. It is kind of lacking here. He'd write for other James Bond movies, music for From Russia with Love, Thunderball, The Living Daylights, and did music for the remake of King Kong, which, despite being a silly movie, has a really great score. The Black Hole, which has great music. Howard the Duck, Dances with Wolves. But yeah, there's not a lot of incidental music going on, and some of it just seems really, really odd.
There is a scene just after Dr. No drowns in the radioactive water. We have a lot of noise. There's the reactor blaring because it's heated up, and there's the news announcer talking about how the missile has successfully launched and everything is okay now. But on top of that, there's this weird little orchestration that just sounds a little too flippant for the scene. It was very uncomfortable to listen to.
I wonder if it was a case of that, well, we need something there, just grab something and stick it under there, and with all the noise, nobody's going to be able to hear it anyway, but I don't know. The last thing we have to mention is the title sequence by Maurice Binder, who would create titles for most of the James Bond movies up to License to Kill, as well as movies such as Charade, Arabesque, Barbarella, and The Last Emperor. And it seems pretty basic now with the geometric shapes and circles and stuff, but it was kind of groundbreaking for its time.
It was very groundbreaking for its time. As far as contributions to cinema goes with this movie, it is the title sequence. It introduces the idea that you can have something very modern in your title sequence. It doesn't have to be a little bit of animation or just, a title scroll over people moving around. It's an actual sequence that gives you the very essence of the character. He's a man of mystery. We, in this moment, are the villain staring down the barrel of the gun at him. But, he got us. So you get involved, and then, of course, you get the dancing girls, because James Bond. But as far as the sequence goes, one of the best uses of rotoscope, and I actually really like rotoscope, and I wish more people would do it. I know it's laborious, I know it's expensive, but it's awesome. Really great use of it.
And that famous gun barrel scene was all Binder's idea, and he actually filmed it with a pinhole camera in the barrel of a gun to get that twisty iris gun barrel. And yeah, that's been in every James Bond movie since.
Yeah.
Although, interesting to note, the guy who turns and shoots is not actually Sean Connery.
Is it not?
Yeah, it's actually stuntman Bob Simmons who does it there. It would be reshot for later films with Connery doing it, but for this first one, it's not Connery. And you can tell because he moves a little differently.
He does. I had wondered about that because he moved a little stiffly, and Sean Connery does not move stiffly.
Let's get into the fun stuff, all the themes and meanings. Primarily, there's this idea of international intrigue being repackaged as crowd-pleasing fantasy, that real spies, are not these suave, debonair people running around in tuxedos. They're usually people in offices, filing paperwork.
I don't know what a spy is usually like. If I were to imagine the life of a spy, it would pretty much being on a lot of airplanes. But I think that's a picture in my mind that I get because of things like James Bond. Because he doesn't live the life of a spy more than he lives the life of an assassin.
That's true. Even though he's kind of considers himself a spy or intelligence agent, he doesn't do a lot of real intelligence work. His idea of investigation is basically to walk into a place, screw things up, hurt people, walk out.
Screw people.
Yeah. He doesn't even really report back his findings very often. He just kind of takes it on himself to do things.
He's a brute force, and the whole idea of having a license to kill is really just a license to do anything he wants. Really applies in this movie.
Yeah, no government agent would have the level of autonomy that he does.
Right.
There would be a lot of paperwork for every time he fires off that little Walther PPK.
But if we were to get into all of the bureaucratic nonsense of spy life, it would not make a very exciting action film.
Action film, no, it could make an exciting film, and we've seen that.
We have seen that. The conversation alone.
Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is another one. As I mentioned, they actually changed Dr. No from being kind of a Russian agent, or at least working with Russia, to being an operative of Spekta, which does kind of remove the film from the political landscape of the day. I mean, this was right in the middle of the Cold War, and I think
it was probably wise because they were in the thick of it. It's not a good idea when countries are in any kind of tension to make a film about how they're all the bad guys. It's not a good idea.
And that would continue with the series, even from Russia with Love. Despite Russia being in the title, the bad guys in that one are changed from Russian intelligence agents to Spectre, again, manipulating both countries.
Right.
So. It's also notable that the film was released in '62, just before the onset of the Cuban Missile Crisis, and involves a villain on an island near the U.S. coast who can effect launching of rockets from Cape Canaveral. There was the sense that audiences would no doubt respond to a hero who could cut through kind of bureaucracy to just resolve the situation, especially when they had this fear of Cuba being right off the coast with all these missiles pointed at him, that there could be a hero who would just rush in and do it.
Why don't you just send in James Bond? He'll fix it.
And U.S. authorities at the time had actually expressed concern that Cuba could affect NASA rocket launches using radio waves. So that actually was in the public mind at that particular point. I also think that James Bond also represents a way for Ian Fleming to put Britain back on the socio-political map again. Fleming was actually a friend of Anthony Eden, who had been the British Prime Minister and resigned following the Suez Canal crisis in 1956. Back when France and Britain and Israel invaded Egypt, and through political pressure from the U.S., that invasion was kind of diffused, and at the time that was kind of seen as Britain losing its international influence, that they couldn't really pull that kind of stuff anymore. And Eden actually took a vacation at GoldenEye, the Ian Fleming estate in Jamaica. So I almost wonder if this was Fleming's way of saying, no, well, the U.S. is powerless to actually resolve this situation that's right in their backyard. This one British agent, he can go fix it. And while America just stands there kind of going, huh, what's happening?
I mean, I agree with you. It's something to think about, but I'm not sure that's really why we get a James Bond story. And of course, it's dangerous to think you can think what the author was thinking. But he was in the military. And I know a lot of people who are in the military think about their military life. And I'm sure all of them have dreams of what they could do and how they could fix and solve all these problems that they're sent out to do but aren't allowed to because of bureaucratic stuff. So it's a fantasy of what could I fix if I had license to do anything I wanted, like this character that I'm creating. What could I solve?
Well, especially because specifically later on Bond starts resolving situations in other countries like America where he'd have no jurisdiction. I do think there's a little bit of the, see, Britain can do it better kind of attitude there.
I'm not even sure if it's Britain can do it better more than the fantasy of, well, yeah, me as this one person going in, I could solve all these problems. It may not be as broad as saying because he's a British man, he can do this. I think the British part comes in just because James Bond is British and the author is British.
Well, again, it goes to the Felix Leiter character, that we have this American character who's presented as being pretty much ineffectual. That, I mean, you'd think that Leiter could send his Marines into Crab Key and start messing stuff up, but never really does. Instead, he waits for James Bond to resolve the situation, and he'll show up after it's all done.
The way I see that with Felix is that Felix's hands are tied by bureaucratic nonsense. He's not free to do all the things he wants to do or could do. And how much separates Felix from James Bond as far as being an agent goes, we don't know because we never get to really explore that. I would like to talk about the 3 blind mice.
Okay, go.
Why? Just why? Why?
I don't know. They're the closest it comes to colorful henchmen, if you'll pardon the term, in this particular movie.
The movie opens after we get this glorious introduction of what we're supposed to get, the spy movie. We get the song 3 Blind Mice playing, and the tone is just destroyed. The tone we get with that glorious introduction is smashed with 3 blind mice. And then you have 3 male characters who are, at this moment, we're supposed to assume blind, but they are pretending to be blind. To what end?
Well, that I'm actually okay with, because
but to what end? Like, they didn't need to pretend to be blind to do what they did.
But it's one of those things that you do see in spy movies where it's the thing that makes everybody underestimate them. That nobody gives them a second look like, oh, this person's harmless, and all of a sudden,
If you saw
boom.
3 blind people in a row tapping their sticks harder than necessary, would you remember them? Would you notice them? I would.
It gets to the Matt Murdock thing. You'd also think if there was a murder committed, it couldn't have been them that did it. They wouldn't be shooting people up.
Yeah. But again, that plays to the villains and disabilities.
Well, this I don't mind so much because it's a feigned disability.
It's a feigned disability, but it's still
something.
It's still playing around with that otherness.
Well, to me, it's much more, again, a matter of throwing people off their game by making them underestimate how dangerous a particular person is. So I can actually get by on that one. I think that one's okay for me. It's kind of like you see in other spy movies where somebody looks like they can't walk, they need a cane, and all of a sudden they'll use it to beat somebody up and walk normally.
I think my main issue with that does come from the music.
It sets a bizarre tone in that scene. It is
really strange.
It's sort of a calypso version of Three Blind Mice with these bizarre different lyrics. Yeah.
So it automatically has put us in a place where we, assuming the audience is British or American, we are watching a charming little tropical scene. Listen, the calypso music. Look, the black people. Ugh.
At least it's not that Underneath the Mango Tree song that we get drilled into our heads for the rest of the film.
I had forgotten about that song.
Sorry.
Because I wanted to. I was like, I know there was another song they kept repeating. I think toward the end credits, it went right back into Underneath the Mango Tree. Didn't it?
It did, and then jumped into the Bond theme for the actual credits.
This whole idea of, oh, you're frolicking in the tropics under mango trees, which... Are there mango trees in Jamaica?
I have no idea.
Which leads me to another question. Well, not really a question, but a comment. There are no chimpanzees in Jamaica in the wild. They don't exist there. But somehow this movie thinks there are. So during the scene where they're going through the swamp and trying to escape, we have sound effects of chimpanzees.
Which is probably a case
movie,
of...
what are you doing?
The sound editor going, need jungle noises. This'll do. Here, fine, great.
Yes, because all tropical areas have the same flora and fauna.
Let's get into a little trivia for the movie. The title of the film was initially mistranslated in Japan as We Don't Want a Doctor. Also, you'll like this one. Allegedly, Ian Fleming, after seeing the film, regarded it as dreadful.
Ian Fleming was right. See... It's the Flemings.
See, he probably thought it wasn't really racist and sexist and homophobic enough. Connery allegedly...
I'm going to live in my pretend bubble for a moment. He agrees with me. It's a horrible movie because it's horrible for everybody. Unless you're James Bond.
Connery allegedly slept in his Savile Row suit to break it in and grow comfortable in it.
That's gross.
All right, one really funny thing I do like, the painting that Bond does a double take at when they're passing through Dr. No's lair is a portrait of the Duke of Wellington painted by de Goya that had been stolen the year before the movie was released and was actually recovered 3 years later.
I actually didn't know about that. I'd never seen that painting. I've never heard of that painting. So I really enjoyed that bit of trivia. It's something that would have been in the public consciousness at the time, but for a viewer like me, like 40 years later at this point, I missed it.
And it's something that Joanna Harwood kind of stuck in the script as a little joke. They do that again in Thunderball, where they mention the British train robbery, the very famous one, that Spectre was a consultant on. The infamous scene where the spider is crawling on Connery, it looks almost like it's been composited in. What actually happened is Connery would not have the spider on him, so they actually had to put a sheet of glass between him and the spider.
Oh, and that might explain, because I thought I'd seen a string for a fraction of a second, and I was trying to figure out why there was a string, if they were trying to guide the spider. I may have seen a reflection of the glass.
Possibly. To get it to work, they actually had to shoot it with the bed propped on its back so the spider would crawl the right way. Any of the times you see the spider actually on Bond's skin, it's stuntman Bob Simmons, who said it was one of the creepiest stunts he ever had to do. You can also see that Connery and Andrus are both wearing swimsuits during their radiation scrub. I mean, they don't even really try to hide it very well. And that really obvious stuntman when Bond is crawling down the tunnel in his big escape
Which was
scene.
funny.
The concept that Dr. No's aquarium windows actually magnify the fish outside was at the last minute because they found that the stock footage they had was out of scale with the window, that the fish were too big, so they had to explain it somehow, so they threw in that line about it being convex, and Connery's little comment about minnows as whales.
When I saw that for the first time, when I saw the fish, I was like, holy shit, somebody screwed up with the stock footage. And then after, when they're explaining it, I was like, really? So they meant it?
Well, especially after that chase scene where it looks like Connery's car is shrunk down to like model car size.
Oh my God. So funny.
Because the assassin's car is looming huge behind him. It just looks ludicrous.
There's that one moment where this giant car is the car could not, like, there's scale here is completely just a mess. The car in the background has filled the entire screen, and James Bond is still in the front going in his little car.
I want the wide shot where he looks like Gizmo in his little model car driving in front of the bad guys.
Can't believe this movie made so much money.
Although it was made first in the book chronology, Dr. No Falls from Russia with Love, and the scene where Bond gets his gun replaced with the Walther PPK, and M says it was jammed on him during his last mission and nearly got him killed and he ended up in the hospital, actually refers to the cliffhanger ending from Russia with Love, where Fleming had considered killing Bond off at the end of that book, and ends with him being stuck with a poison needle and apparently dying, and then he decided to resurrect him for Dr. No. But it's a little weird that incident they're referring to technically would have happened in the next movie.
I actually thought that moment was good in the script because it gave us some history. It showed us that, James Bond has been doing this for a while, and the job is dangerous, and he has the tools that he relies on.
As for the legacy of the film, as we discussed, it introduced a lot of conventions that would become regular elements of the series. The villain with the physical deformity, the high-tech lair, the big assassination attempt that Bond escapes, the scene with the villain explaining his motivations and plan, usually over dinner or drinks.
The first woman that he sleeps with and ditches, the second woman that he kind of falls in love with and then by the next movie ditches.
It's interesting that there's not a lot of gadgets in this movie.
There really aren't. I think the only gadget that I remember seeing, and it's not even a gadget, when they made snorkels out of reeds.
Which is really silly because they hold them like normal store-bought snorkels, which undoubtedly they actually were. But yeah, that's one thing they get into, and I think a little too much in some of the later Bond films, but something that we'll see as time goes on. The next movie will have the first one. I enjoy the
gadgets. For me, the gadgets distract from the rest of the film.
Many critics felt the film verged on self-parody at the time of release, and the Vatican condemned its violence and sexual content.
Wait, how could there have been self-parody in a film that hadn't done anything before this?
Well, maybe they mean from the book series itself, because the book series was pretty well known at that point.
Okay.
The Kremlin would go on to denounce Bond as a symbol of the evils of capitalism. Yeah, he's not the best frontman for capitalism.
He's absolutely not the right person to represent us. I demand another vote.
And as we mentioned, the film and the Bond series in general would change the perception of film spies from anonymous people gathering intelligence to rugged macho assassins who serve as world police and deal with maniacal villains. I mean, no spy would want to be out in the public eye as much as Bond is and, check into hotels and drive cars too fast.
He's also the worst. Everybody knew where he was staying. They knew where his home was in Britain. They knew where he was staying in Jamaica.
Dr. No had his suit size.
Yes. Like, somebody was gathering all of this information on an agent who is supposedly the top of his field.
You mean someone was doing what spies do?
I think so. I think that's what spies do, don't they?
They drive fancy cars. That's what they do.
That's also something that was introduced. The idea that there's going to be some kind of luxury car and some kind of car chase. I was actually looking for that to see how early it came in.
And it's a car without gadgets, but yeah, we do get a car chase.
It is a car without gadgets.
Oh, actually, it does have a gadget. It can shrink Bond down to half size for the duration of the chase.
But it is the introduction of a luxury car. And of course, you get to a point where marketing's going to be like, hey, can you chip in for this car? It's free publicity.
Yeah, and then we get the Aston Martin and the BMW and all the other ones.
Yeah.
All right, this might be tough. I got to ask, what's your favorite scene?
Oh, my God. Oh, no, it's easy, actually. Okay, my favorite scene is when James Bond has been captured in his little prison in Dr. No's lair, and he decides, oh, look, a giant vent on the wall. I'm going to climb up there and try to get out, and he gets electrocuted. He's slammed against the wall, falls on the ground. That's my favorite part of the whole movie.
I will say, in all honesty, I do like the James Bond Dr. No dinner confrontation, just because it's this thing that you see often in Bond movies where he's trying to throw the villain off his game. He throws insults at him, that whole line about, how does toppling a rocket make up for the wash of hands? And it's not working at all with Dr. No. He's completely unfazed, nothing affects him, and he throws it right back at Connery.
Our asylums are full of people who think they're Napoleon or God.
You persist in trying to provoke me, Mr. Bond. I could have had you killed in the swamp.
And why didn't you?
I thought you less stupid. You cost me time, money, effort. You damaged my organization and my pride. I was curious to see what kind of a man you were. I thought there might even be a place for you as Spectre. Unfortunately, I misjudged you. You are just a stupid policeman whose luck is run out.
I do like the back and forth there, and we see, again, that that's going to be a huge influence on how Bond and villains relate for the rest of the series. All right, what are your recommendations? It's clearly you didn't like this one. What film do you think somebody should watch instead?
Okay, so here's the thing. If you like James Bond, and I won't hold it against you too much, but if you like James Bond, then watch every other James Bond film.
Not every other one. Trust me.
No. Watch all of them. Put yourself through that pain. Then you will understand. If you don't like James Bond, and I applaud you, go with The Bourne Identity. It's dated because it's, 10 years ago? But it's a solid movie. There are stakes, and it's not very offensive. Additionally, if you liked Dr. No, but you want to watch a quality movie, I would recommend that you sit down and watch The Conversation and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy back to back.
For me, I'm going to do two that are very tonally different from James Bond, but I think kind of fall into the same idea. If you want a movie that depicts spy activities a little bit more realistically and is set in the same period, I'd say Alfred Hitchcock's Topaz, which is sort of almost a behind the scenes of the Cuban Missile Crisis as agents get into Cuba and trying to find out what's going on. It has John Forsythe, John Vernon, and is worth it just for one great scene with Roscoe Lee Brown, Box from Logan's Run, where he plays this spy who's a florist on the side who has to sneak into this headquarters and get this information that's really amazingly suspenseful back and forth as he's trying to charm his way into the building. It's really well done. The other one I'd say is a movie called The Ipcris File, which is from Harry Saltzman, same producer as this movie, and has a lot of the same production crew, including production designer Ken Adam, editor Peter Hunt, and composer John Barry. And that's the first film of the Harry Palmer series with Michael Caine. And it's the complete opposite in that instead of being this suave, super sophisticated guy, Harry Palmer is this bookish nerd who has to deal with all the bureaucracy and red tape and can't get anything done and is completely stymied trying to solve this particular mystery. But Caine is really great in it. It's got a really creepy film noir edge to it. It's very, very good. They made a couple. They also made Funeral in Berlin and I think it's The $1 Billion Brain, but it's a really, really good film. Any other final thoughts?
Shut up, James Bond.
All right, there you have it. That ends our conversation, but not the discussion. If you'd like to have your say about Dr. No or feel that we missed something, check out the comment section for this episode on cinemaspection.com and start talking. Email your comments, complaints, questions, and suggestions to cinemaspection@gmail.com. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. Our show is available on iTunes and Stitcher, so if you like what you hear, please subscribe to us, and if you have a moment to spare, please leave us a review. Your reviews help improve our visibility, and we always appreciate your feedback. We'll be back to discuss another movie next time. Until then, remember to keep watching closely. There's more to a movie than just what's on the screen.
Fetch my shoes.
Shut up, James Bond.